Aguántame esto aquí para lo mismo. Hi everyone and welcome to the International Coaching Week Puerto Rico chapter. I thank each of you for connecting and supporting us. My name is Olga Cintron. I am the president of the ICF Puerto Rico chapter, and we are going to enjoy a fabulous conference in this moment. This webinar will be recorded and at the same time it will be broadcast on Facebook Live. This webinar also counts 1 credit of continuing education. If you want the credit of continuing education, you can email us, send us an email at educacion.continua.icfpr. educacion.continua.icfpr para los créditos de educación continua. I would like to know where you come from. Please introduce each of you that are with us in this moment. We want to know where you come from. And also, while you introduce, if you have some questions during the webinar, please write it on the chat box and Rachel will be answer it during our conversation. Since today we are going to have an opening password and closing password. Our opening password for today's webinar is resilience. Opening password, resilience. Let me introduce our today's guest, Rachel Carew. Rachel's personal journey as recovering perfectionist inspired her to create Stepping Into More, a professional and personal development company dedicated to supporting clients to identify their GPS, natural gifts, passions, and where they like to be in the service in order to honor their true north. Activities where the 3 components intersect. Prior to launching Stepping Into More, Rachel worked in global organizations as human resources manager and manager of training and organization development. Rachel earned a master's degree in counseling for business, is a certified ICF coach, and it is certified also in strengths-based coach. Rachel is the past president for the ICF Los Angeles and currently serves as executive advisor on the board of directors. Rachel serves as the co-leader for the International Coaching Federation Virtual Community, Coaching and Human Capital Community of Practice. Rachel is the author of Stepping into More, Lesson from a Recovering Perfectionist, and the producer of the CD, Stepping into More. Another thing that I want to share with you about Rachel Carew is that her first passion was singing, and she stopped singing for over 20 years when a car accident changed everything. She can talk about what is resilience and what we could do to step up and continue our life in these moments in which we have many challenges. Welcome, Rachel.
Gracias, Olga. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
It's such a delight to be with you, Puerto Rico. I wish my Spanish was better. Otherwise, I'd present in Spanish. So thank you in advance for your patience with my English presentation. And please know if you have questions or if you're not understanding something, to please put that in the chat box. I also asked Olga or Pedro to also let me know if we need to translate at any point. So as Olga mentioned, in my past life as a human resources manager and manager of training and organizational development, I supported organizations in moving through large changes. For example, I was human resources manager at EMI Music Distribution, where we had a large reorganization and layoff. And I helped that process. And then I also conducted what's called survivor training for the employees that were left after the layoff. And when doing this type of work in survivor training, the focus is on how do others through change. When I now work with organizations, as I'm sure some of you do too, on how leaders can support others in moving through change, I always get the question from at least one person, well, how do I help change when I'm really struggling with it myself? And for this very reason, I created a self-resilience indicator or assessment to support people either leading people through change or just for themselves and helping navigate through change on their own. And as Olga mentioned, our focus for today is going to be on this idea of resilience. So let me go ahead and share my slides. And hopefully that worked. There we go. So when we think about resilience, you'll see a few definitions here. One is that ability to recover from or adjust easily to change. And by the way, I'm happy to send these slides to you afterwards, so don't worry about taking too many notes. Another part of this definition is our ability not only to survive, but to thrive in the face of challenge, adversity. And then if you think of technically resilience, our ability to bounce back, like the rubber band in the picture here. And the assessment that I created focuses on 8 facets of resilience, and it's not cooperating here, so give me a moment. There we go. And specifically what we're going to be honing in on today as we get into this topic of resilience, we're going to start with self-awareness, and then a little bit later we're going to hone in on the other facet of being flexible and adaptable. So in light of what's going on with COVID-19, obviously, we are in the midst of a huge change, and it's an ongoing, long-lasting change. And when this first took place, I, being on the board of ICF Los Angeles, thought this was a very important concept of resilience that we needed to be focusing on as a community. And I volunteered my model for my assessment to lead resilience workshops for Los Angeles. And also we created a resilience guide or resource guide on our website, which is really asking you as fellow ICF members, if you have resources in any of these facets, to please go share those resources with not only the Los Angeles community, but any ICF member that accesses that resource. So when we think about change, in any change model you look at, the first phase of change brings about a lot of emotion. And I often refer to this as either disorientation or chaos. And the reason for that is because we feel a lack of control when change is suddenly thrust upon us. And we might be asking ourselves questions like, why are we changing things? Or how am I gonna fit into this change? Or take it real personal, like, why is this happening to me? And it's very natural to have those feelings. And by the way, some people love change and thrive on change, and they might have strong positive emotions as well. The bottom line is there's gonna be a lot of emotions. And for that very reason, as leaders, to support people in moving through change, and I definitely consider us as coaches, as leaders in helping others move through change, is we, number one, need to help support people in moving through those emotions instead of trying to push them away. And number two, we want to engage people in the change by getting them involved in the change as soon as possible. So today's purpose is for you to be able to do a little reflection for yourself personally and to practice some self-care. And I'm going to introduce you to a couple of different exercises that you will do today on your own. And then, of course, having this additional awareness and consciousness and tools, you can also be bringing this to your clients as well. So the first concept here of self-awareness, you'll see I have a definition here. And people that are really adept at being self-aware through change, they're very much can take accountability for recognizing what they cannot change, and they don't blame others when experiencing change. They have a high level of self-awareness around their values, their emotions, their thoughts, their strengths and development areas. And they're able to use that awareness to manage themselves as well as to manage relationships with others. Some emotional intelligence. And they focus very much on what they can control instead of spending wasted time and energy on things that are outside of their control and influence. And this last bullet is going to be our main focus as we get into this facet. I'm going to give you an opportunity first on your own to be able to consider how you're doing with self-awareness. And then we're going to have some conversation as a large group. And you'll notice as we go through this, I'll be asking you to first think on your own, then I'll be asking for your input on the chat box. So the first thing I'd like to ask you to please do is to take out a piece of paper or on a computer and to write out for yourself these 3 columns. And this is specifically thinking right now about what's happening with COVID-19. What are things that are absolutely out of your control? What are things that you can influence? And what are things that you can control? So the first thing I'd like to do is just give you a couple of minutes on your own to answer that very question. What is out of your control? What can you influence? And what can you control in your current circumstance with COVID-19? Hi, Olga.
Can you double click more on how we can influence and some examples of what is influence, please?
Yes, we're actually going to go through each one by one in just a moment. But the high level response to that is oftentimes with change, we feel like we don't have any control. And usually when we start to do an exercise like this, we might realize that, oh, there might be some things that I can at least ask for what I want. I could try to influence other people to move in a certain direction. So at the high level, that's what we mean by influence. And like I said, in a moment, once people have had a chance to think on their own, we'll break this down in even more detail. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks for asking. So go ahead, take another minute there on your own. Just a few more seconds. Okay, so wherever you're at is just fine. And let's, now that you've had a chance to reflect on this for yourselves, let's start to break this down together. So starting with this idea of no control. I've given you here some examples, whoops, sorry. There we go, of things that I felt I cannot control at this moment. Obviously, I cannot control the virus. I cannot control clients that might be canceling or needing to reschedule. I cannot control that there are businesses that are falling and closing around me. And I also can't control the impact that the coronavirus is having on our economy. So these are all things, unfortunately, out of my control. And when you think about things that are out of your control, the importance here is to realize it's probably not going to serve you to focus on these things because there's nothing you can do about it, right? And I don't know about you, but in the past, through different changes, I wasted way too much time and energy honing in on things I cannot control. So I'd love to hear from some of you. What are some of the things that came to mind when you thought of what you can't control? All right, we see Facebook, other people's behavior, the statistics. Great, what else comes to mind? Lockdown, absolutely. Government measures. All right. Yes, so these are great responses, and all of these things are sometimes out of our control. So I'd like to now go to Olga's question around influence and to talk more about influencing. As I mentioned, influencing is where we might be able to shift somebody's either thoughts or actions or attitude. And when I thought specifically about what I can influence currently, this is what came to mind for me. Number one, the fact that I am facilitating this session here with you today is a result of my influence. As I mentioned before, I influenced ICF Los Angeles to start by having resilience workshops and creating that guide I mentioned to you. We have annually the Global Leaders Forum for ICF Global. And before the first meeting, they asked the presidents and people on the board to share, what are your chapters doing around this crisis that we're having? And I shared some of the work that we're doing in Los Angeles. They asked me during the first meeting to speak for a moment. And I just briefly shared some of the activities I mentioned to you. And as a result, ICF Toronto approached me. You guys have approached me. I'm going to be speaking for ICF Panama. All of that is just because I raised my hand and said, here's something I think is important right now. So we often have more opportunity for influencing than we realize. And what I'd love to hear from you now in the chat box, what were some of your thoughts and ideas around what we can influence? And as you're writing that down too, one idea I want to put out there for you to consider, sometimes when we write things that are out of our control, we actually might be able to influence them more than we can think. So even, for example, me saying that I have no control over businesses closing, that might be somewhat accurate. But how about me actually going to local restaurants and ordering in food, or paying to go to live streaming workout sessions for different gyms? That is a way for me to try to influence that situation so that hopefully they will stay in business. All right, let's hear from you. So developing new strategies to deliver our services. We might be able to influence our family or our neighbors, absolutely. Who else might we be able to influence, or what else might we be able to influence? Company leaders, absolutely. Who else? All right, coworkers, sure. Yes, so the bottom line here is that we want to really be thoughtful and mindful about, okay, what can we influence in times like this? So that brings us to our third, oh, now we have a bunch more people here. Creative, innovative products and services, sharing positive things on Facebook, absolutely. WhatsApp friends and what we're putting out there, terrific examples. So let's now shift to this idea of control. And when it comes to control in life, ultimately, we are the only one we can control. That includes our attitude, that includes our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions. I'm going to share a powerful quote with you from Viktor Frankl. And for those of you that are not familiar with Viktor Frankl, he was a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust, and he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And in the book, he shared the following quote: "We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken away from man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." Pretty powerful. And it's that simple and it's that hard, right? So when I think about control, some things that come to mind for me personally, being intentional with my mindset. Each morning I think about things that I am grateful for, and each night before I go to sleep, I do the same thing. I also found that having a routine for myself, including self-care and meditation and exercise, is extremely powerful and important all the time, but especially now. And we as coaches, we're usually so good at supporting others. We're not always as good at supporting ourselves and taking care of ourselves. And as they say, when we used to fly in airplanes, putting the oxygen mask on first before putting it on for others. So when you think about things that you can control, I'd love to hear from you in the chat box. What comes to mind? Wellness, the way I speak to others, how I treat others, on Facebook being positive, gratitude, social distancing, doing Facebook Live with tools to bring people out of the darkness, my attitude, being an example of patience and faith, my learnings, my improving my relationships, spirituality, my well-being. Absolutely, what a fantastic list. Living every moment, yes, Amen to that. Yeah, so you're getting the hang of this here. So really, really important for us to be considering what can we control and what can we influence during a time like now, so that we, again, don't get stuck in thinking about what's out of our control, and instead start to really hone in on what we can control and what we can influence. So with that in mind, what I'd like to give you a moment to do is, I'm a big believer that the universe rewards action, even if it's a small baby step action. And so I'd like you to please consider what might be one action that you could be taking within the next week to either be more intentional about focusing on something that is within your control or something that you can influence. And once again, I'd love for you to utilize that chat box and let us know, what is an action plan, a small step you can be taking towards things that are in your control or what you can influence. So let's see what you got. Give you a moment to focus and to think. Time management. Yes, and I'd invite you to get really granular for your goals, like what specifically around time management. So as you're thinking about this, the more specific, measurable timetables, for those of you that are familiar with SMART goals, the more nitty-gritty and granular you get, the higher probability of success. What other goals do we have here? Cleaning the family room closet. Love it. Okay, great. Less time on social media. Planning my marketing calendar for the last half of May and June. Starting to use my weekly agenda again. Yes, routine is so helpful in times like this. Reinventing the way we do things. Absolutely. If you need help on Facebook, asking for it. Blocking lunchtime and really creating that space for yourself for lunch and to recharge. Giving positive feedback, finishing the painting on my house. I'm using the gym in your house. Yes, absolutely. Any others? Taking the good. Yes, there's lots of innovation that's happening as a result of all of this change. That is the silver lining. Taking more webinars, preparing for the future, and being more present. Absolutely. Talking about my feelings. Fabulous list here. Thank you so much. So we'll pause here for a moment, and now that you've started to get some awareness around being more self-aware, I'd like to shift gears and talk about our next facet. And that is going to be around being flexible and adaptable. And when we think about resilience and being flexible and adaptable, people with this facet are aware of the changes that are occurring around them. They are able to anticipate upcoming transitions and be able to have emotional and mental flexibility. They're able to tolerate ambiguity and uncertainty and to readapt and to regroup and to rethink, even when the unexpected comes their way. And this COVID-19 is certainly unexpected. And being able to stay strong and gentle, and it's so strong at the same time as staying gentle and being open to creating win-win situations. So there's a lot of dichotomy there, right? We need to anticipate the future, but when we can't anticipate it, how do we rally and how do we stand strong in our convictions while still being open and focusing on others? Not always easy to do. So as we get into this facet, I'd like you to consider for yourself, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being low, 5 being high, prior to this epidemic, on a scale of 1 to 5, where do you see yourself in terms of being able to be flexible and adaptable? Just note that for yourself on that scale of 1 to 5. Okay, we got a 4 there. Thank you. Got a 5. We got 3. A lot of 4s coming in. Another 5. Okay, so many people in that 4 range. We got some 3. So yeah, wherever you're at is totally great. Thank you. Now I'd like you to consider on a scale of 1 to 5 during COVID-19, how flexible and adaptable are you here? So once again, go ahead and note that for yourself. And if you could, in the chat box, just write down, do you see yourself currently more flexible and adaptable or less flexible and adaptable? If you could share that with us, that'd be awesome. So, okay, Layla says more flexible and adaptable, 5+. We have someone that says less. Okay, a lot of mores, interesting. I actually personally have found in the beginning initially, I was less flexible and adaptable and really have had to work on becoming more flexible and adaptable. And mostly because of being in that amygdala flight or freeze or fight mode for a long time. That's took an adjustment. It took me a breath for sure. Sometimes more, sometimes less. Yes, that happens. Absolutely. All right. So one thing that I'd like to talk about when it comes to being flexible and adaptable is this idea of what might get in the way, right? Because I might share this theory with you. Oh, sounds good to be flexible and adaptable. Sure. But sometimes, as you all know as coaches, we have limiting beliefs, right? We have these old tapes in our head that might be getting in the way of us being flexible and adaptable. So I would love to hear from you. What are some of those old beliefs that might be getting in your way around being flexible and adaptable? As I mentioned to you, for me, it was kind of being in that stress mode for a long period of time and being able to kind of get out of the panic of it and being able to realize, okay, I am safe. I still have freedom. Again, what can I control? What can I influence? All of that helped me also to be more flexible and adaptable at this current time. So what gets in your way from being more flexible and adaptable? I'd love to hear from you here. You guys, somebody said they can't see me. Did you lose me? I guess whenever I started to see way too many news that led to doubts, that increased your negativity, that's totally understandable. What else might get in your way? Procrastination, yeah, discouragement. Lack of decision making around with our leaders and our government. Sure. Yes, so it's super important that we're aware, because I'm sure, as most of you know, most of our thoughts are in our brain are negative and subconscious. So the more that we can bring them up to that conscious level, then we have a choice, right? And we're much more empowered. So I appreciate you sharing what might have been getting in the way in the past for you around being more flexible and adaptable at this time. So with that in mind, once again, I'm going to invite you to consider what might be an action step that you can take within the next week to be more flexible and adaptable. And as you're thinking about what is an action step you can take, I'll share a personal example. So for those of you that might be familiar with improvisation, there's an idea of yes and. So instead of saying no, which is our tendency, how can we embrace more yes and build upon it? And that's particularly true for me, something I'm working on, but especially now at this time, because I'm home right now with my son and my husband, and the way they're working through this situation is having all kinds of ideas. They're putting puzzles together in the house and which are in the center of my living room. They're creating new sidewalk chalk Instagram account and trying to get followers. And they're doing all kinds of things that are very different than how I normally would handle things. So how can I be in flow with that and really encourage them to do what they need to do? And at the same time, how do I take care of myself the way I know I need to at this time? So I'd love to hear in the chat box, what is one action item that you can take this week to increase your flexibility and adaptability? What do we have? To access empathy for yourself because of the new situation. Yes, and compassion. Smiling more. What else? More, to be more tolerant. Yeah, to love. Beautiful. Meditation, prayer, having space for yourself. Yes, dancing and singing more. I love it. I just danced today. Speaking up. Yeah, having a voice, right? So empowering. Manifesting your love for others. Sharing your emotions. Yes. Being mindful. Wonderful list. Being caring. Thank you. This is fantastic. And I just want to piggyback on that comment about sharing our emotions, because I think as coaches, it's really easy for us to kind of be in the cheerleading mode and wanting to help and support others, that sometimes we're not willing to be vulnerable ourselves. We're not willing to share what's truly happening below the surface because it's not perfect. And as somebody said before, sometimes I'm doing great, sometimes I'm not doing so great. So I really am delighted that you're here today as a step in taking care of yourself, and hope that through your ICF Puerto Rico community that you can continue to be honest and vulnerable with each other and real with each other, so that you can thrive throughout this change. I'm showing my vulnerabilities, absolutely. Recognizing the fact I have to share my space and labor space with a family. Yes, not always easy to do. So fantastic examples here. Thank you so much. And just some additional thoughts here when it comes to cultivating adaptability and flexibility. It often requires us to view that change and to accept that change is really one of the few things we can count on. And to be able to be okay with ambiguity, with the not knowing. And to also start to be thinking contingency thinking. Okay, it's all about not plan A, but plan B, sometimes plan C. And how do you stay true to your own vision, your values, your purpose, while still creating that space and graciousness for others in our lives? And part of flexibility and adaptability too is willingness to take action and to keep moving forward, even though we might not know exactly what will happen or what the impact will be. Better than analysis paralysis for sure. So one idea that I want to put out there is we're thinking about both flexibility and adaptability, as well as self-awareness or resilience in general. As pretty much with any coaching topic, I like to make the distinction between doing and being. And as Olga mentioned, I am a recovering perfectionist. So as a recovering perfectionist, my tendency is to focus on action. That being said, it might not come as naturally for me to think about who I'm being and how do I want to feel? How do I want to experience any situation? Or what qualities do I want to internally feel as I'm having any type of interaction? Because at the end of the day, we could check a million things off our list, but if we're miserable, who cares, right? So now that you've had a chance to identify some action items for yourself around this competency, both flexibility and adaptability, as well as self-awareness, I'd like you to consider, what experience do you want to have as you are moving towards fulfilling your goal? So as you're considering that, and I'd love to hear in the chat box from you once again, going back to the example I mentioned to you about being in that yes and mode with my son and husband, this really requires self-management for me, and not to just go with my knee-jerk reaction and perhaps say something that I might regret. And in order for that to happen, I need to exhibit a few qualities. One is around compassion. Compassion for myself, compassion for others and for my family. Also kindness. How can I be kind to myself and others, even though things aren't exactly the way I like them, even though it might feel a little more out of control in my house than I normally would like. And the other is, how can I assume good intent? That my husband and son, they're doing the best they can to work through this situation in a way that they feel good about. And how can I assume that their intentions are good towards me, even though my knee-jerk reaction might be, oh, I don't like that. So I'd love to hear from you. What is the mindset you'd like to have in order to be successful with your goal and to feel fulfilled with your goal? All right, empathy. Great. Other feelings or qualities you want to exhibit? Peace, a few peace, yes. Joyful, loving, committed, absolutely. Listening more, self-compassion, vulnerability, self-acceptance. Harmony in the middle of the moment, lovely. Actually realize we're in a better situation than Viktor Frankl, that is for sure. Keep perspective, absolutely. Being wholehearted, being patient, lovely. Free of unreal expectations, being mindful. Doing good things without a purpose, just to be the satisfaction of being there for someone. Having a good sense of humor, seeing the positive. So, whew, love this list. And imagine if we were all coming from that place, how we would be at this time, and how differently we might show up if we could keep reminding ourselves to stay centered and grounded in those qualities that we want to exhibit while we're taking action. So I think this is a good point to pause for a moment. I know I've shared a lot of information. I am going to close out in a little bit with a little special treat for you. But before we do that, I want to take a moment to see what other questions you have at this point. So Olga or Pedro, if you want to help me with that, that would be great. So you can write your questions in the chat box.
Yes, Rachel, we have one. What is analysis paralysis that you mentioned before?
Thank you. Yeah, so for some of us, we get so caught up in thinking about things and the fear that it might not turn out right, that we actually stop taking action. And instead, we get paralyzed. So going back to that idea of the brain and the amygdala, that is that freeze state where we just don't do anything at all. Great question. What other questions?
Let's see. We don't have any other questions in this moment.
Fantastic.
We have another one here
Okay.
through Facebook.
Sure, thanks.
I'm handling. How do you, I'm translating, sorry, from Spanish. How do you work with on being present with family members who are not?
That's a great one.
Great.
Yes, and I wish that we could actually have an exchange here, because I would definitely throw out that question to all of you, and you could feel free to write in the chat box here. How do we be present with family members that are not? So the first thing that comes to mind as I hear that question takes me back to our first facet of resilience that we were working on around self-awareness. And when I think about others that aren't present, I can't control them. So I might, depending on my relationship, be able to influence them. How might I be able to influence them? Well, one possibility is me sharing my intention, how I'm preferring to show up at this time. What does presence look like for me? If I have a specific request or an intention that I'd like to manifest with others in my life, I might share that instead of focusing on what I don't like about what they're doing or judging them and saying, you're not being present. Perhaps I can share more about how I'd like our relationship to be, or how I think things might be smoother if we could both do X or be X. So not moving into that judgment, I think, is going to be key, and recognizing I'm a big believer in asking for what we want, and we cannot be tied to an expectation. So if I put it out there, I might get some influencing ability and I might not. But if I don't put it out there, there will definitely be an impact there in my relationships. Perhaps I'll be resentful, perhaps I'll get angry. So how can you create that space for that person to be how they're going to be, and at the same time ask for what you want to need?
We have another question in the Q&A section. It's in Spanish, so I'm going to translate also. It's from Andres Guedes. He says, could you give us some tip to work with procrastination?
Yes, that's a common thing. And oftentimes with procrastination, as I was mentioning, in any situation, there's the doing and the being. So I actually do quite a bit of work on time management with my clients. And what I'll do to start is ask them, after I ask them what they're currently doing with, planning or calendaring, whatever, then I'll ask them, when it comes to getting organized and time management, how do you feel about it? And what I'm listening for is their emotion, because I could share the best practices and strategies in the world, but if their calendar reminder comes up and they're looking at it and they say, I hate this, or I don't want to do this, or time management sucks, guess what? They're not going to do it. So when it comes to procrastination, I really invite people, as they're trying to build a new habit with either weekly planning or daily planning, to notice again, what are those subconscious thoughts and feelings that come up? So if that calendar reminder comes up and you start telling yourself a story, instead of judging it, listen, what's the story? And instead of just buying into the story, now that I have awareness of what my thoughts and or feelings are, how can I challenge it? And the way usually to challenge it when it comes to procrastination is remembering the benefit that we're gaining from adopting better organizational skills. And if you engage in a new habit, which most of you know, it takes about 30 days. In the beginning of any new habit, it requires a lot of willpower, and our brain, the neocortex, the thinking part of our brain, actually has a very small capacity. So it takes a lot of energy for us to create a new habit. And we need to be patient with ourselves, because if we stick to this new habit for about a month, over time, we'll no longer be using that part of the brain. We're using another part of the brain that's more for habit, like brushing your teeth, or sadly driving. Sometimes we drive and we're like, how did I get here? And we need to remind ourselves when those old tapes come up, why am I doing this? How is it going to benefit me? And knowing if I stick with this, it's going to get easier. And we'll start to build new synapses in the brain that way, so that eventually that will become our new normal. Fantastic. Great questions. Let's go ahead and take one more, if we have any more, Pedro.
Let me see. No, in the Q&A, we have just a comment. Thank you for the excellent response. Very happy by the response, Andres tells us.
My pleasure, thank you. So with that, first of all, I'm going to share some information, my contact info here, so you have that there. So please, I'd love to stay connected with all of you. It's such a delight being able to support other chapters around the world. And as Olga mentioned, one of my first passions is around creative self-expression, primarily through singing. And I stopped singing for over 20 years because I was a perfectionist and I was very scared of failing. So that thankfully changed, and I wanted to share a little token of my appreciation, and also in the spirit of gratitude that we were speaking about before, I'll share this little gift with you. I've got a roof over my head. I've got a warm place to sleep. Some nights I lie awake counting gifts instead of counting sheep. I've got a heart that can hold love. I've got a mind that can think. There may be times when I lose the light and let my spirit sink, but I can't stay depressed. When I remember how I'm blessed, grateful, grateful, truly grateful I am. Grateful, grateful, truly blessed and duly grateful. Truly blessed and duly grateful. Gracias.
Thank you, Rachel. It's an amazing, you have an amazing voice. Thank you for this gift for us and for the gift of your webinar. We need it in Puerto Rico, and the whole full voice touched my heart. Beautiful. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Many words of gratitude for you, Rachel. We want to thank you and giving you this remember of the experience that we have today. I felt as having a coach at the other side, as you have been, like you have been coaching me. I think that everybody's feel that, and we experience what is to awaken, to have a conscious, and began to find options to work from where we are to where we want to be in our relations, with family relations, personal relations, and professional relations. I love everything you share. Your program is great. And I want to thank you from my heart. And the people are saying thanks. The final word, the closing password is going to be change. Change is going to be the closing password. And I want to thank you, everyone who stayed with us from Venezuela, from Mexico, from Costa Rica, from the United States, and the coaches and visitors from Puerto Rico. Thank you very much. Please stay with us. We are going to come back at 7 o'clock with the next webinar with going to talk about it's not the end, no es el final, es un nuevo comienzo. Y vamos a estar con ella hoy a las 7 de la noche. Rachel, thank you very much to share with us your knowledge, your tools, and your love. Thank you very much, everyone, and see you at 7 o'clock.